Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Geert, for being here.
You're welcome.
For wanting to come to our little corner of Chicago down here in Hyde Park. I think there's lots we could get into, but thankfully we've gotten to spend a little bit of time together this evening and get to know one another. And sort of also remembering the times where we didn't realize that we'd actually been together this past October at the Jubilee for Synodal Teams in Rome, and starting to, I think, just share some of our own reflections on these moments. Coming a little bit out of our conversations, I would love to sort of, just to get us started, given your experience sort of ministering as a deacon and going into, not wanting to get ahead of ourselves, but you mentioned this evening that this was in a different conversation before here, but you had said that as part of your ministry as a deacon, like the Synod on Synodality wasn't something you had imagined. And so I'd love to just start off with, what had you imagined for yourself going into sort of your vocation and your ministry as a deacon? Like, what was that beginning point for you?
Well, just before I got ordained, I gave an interview to a newspaper, and it's very interesting to read back interviews from a long time ago. I was ordained in 2013, and what I said there was what I expected from the diaconate. I expected to be a minister in visiting ships in the harbor of Ghent, the village, well, the town where I live, the city where I live. And I thought that would be part of my ministry. I thought that I would be a teacher as well, which I was then at that moment. So going to the Synod was never part of the plan, and yet it came. And I guess that's what vocation is all about. It brings you in places where, well, you had never expected that you would be there. I remember one morning prayer during the Synod, very much in the beginning of it. We did the prayer of the hours together to get started. And I remember I was sitting there during a moment of reflection, a moment of silence, looking around and asking God, well, is this now the place where you had me in mind? Because I don't know anymore. It's definitely not what I had in mind. And I guess that's how vocation works and how God works, bringing you in those places. Because at the same time, and also by the reactions I got at the moment, so during the Synod, afterwards, before, from other people, I thought, well, maybe yes, maybe this is the place where God expects me to be.
I'm really grateful for the way you've mentioned sort of the plan, that I think we all really love our plans a lot. At least I do. I really like a good plan. What plans did you have going into the Synod? Are there things that sort of stuck? What about those plans have shifted through that process?
My plan was to, because I was the only permanent deacon. I was one of the non-bishop members. So in terms of ranking, everybody outranked me, except for the other non-bishops. But I thought I would be there just to listen, and that's it. And maybe say a few things around these round tables, but that was it. But then, you're a deacon, and people keep asking about deacons, because it was clear to me right from the beginning of the Synod that people do not really know what deacons are, who deacons are, what they do, what's the use of having them. I remember a conversation in the very beginning, actually before the synod during the retreat, when I introduced myself as a deacon, and the question that followed immediately by one of the bishops who sat there was, "And when are you going to be ordained a priest?" I said, "I'm not. Normally, I'm not, because it is not my vocation to become a priest. I would like to try and become a good deacon, and that's about it." And he said to me, looked at me, and he said, "Well, we don't need deacons because we have enough priests." So it was clear to me from right from the beginning, and he was not the only one. I have to add that he was not the only one. There were others who asked the same question and said the same thing. So I was wondering, does everybody know here what I'm talking about when I say I'm a deacon? Apparently, well, it was quite clear that they didn't know, actually, which was surprising because that was really the center of the Universal Church. And there were people who got there in the synod, in the synod of bishops who had no clue what to do with a permanent deacon. And at a certain point during the synod, and that was unexpected, someone said to me, "Well, you have to speak up for the deacons. You know, you have to tell what the diaconate is and what it means to be a deacon." So that's what I did, and I think it's important to communicate that as well. I mean, it was a wake up call for me as a deacon. You know, I heard in I've been a few days now in Chicago, and one of the people I talked with said that it's one of the tasks of a deacon to communicate what a deacon is. And I think he's right, because, well, even now, even in places where the diaconate is strong, even in places like Chicago where the diaconate is very strong, I think it's important to say to people what a deacon is and what he does, and why he does what he's doing. I see a deacon mainly, and that's what I told my fellow colleagues at the synod as well. I see deacons as bridge builders. So trying to communicate, trying to establish links between people, and it could be between deacons and priests. It could be between priests and the bishop. It could be between lay people and the priest, the pastor of your parish. It could be within his community as well, or within his family even, or between families. So I think that's the main thing for a deacon to do. And that's what I told them. So I told them as well that when I go out, I mean, out of the church and into the streets, and I meet people, I ask for their story. What is your story? Right? And if people tell them my story, whatever it is, sometimes the only thing I can do is listen to it, and that's it. Of course, if you can help them, you have to help them. But sometimes you cannot. The only thing you can do is listen. But what you do next is important, and that is why I think deacons are ordained, you know, to go out, to reach out to people, people on the margins, as we call them. We should be aware of the fact that these are people who are sometimes rejected by society, but also sometimes rejected by the church. So we should listen to their pain, maybe respond to that, maybe not, but keep it in our hearts, like, you know, Mary did. She kept it in her heart. She didn't understand, but she kept it in her heart. That's what a deacon does as well. And when he serves at the altar, or when he preaches on Sunday, during the Sunday Mass, which is, you know, the source and summit of our Christian life, of our life as baptized, you remember the stories and you pray with these stories, to lay them on the altar, right in the center of Christian life. I think that is important to do. And I think that is part of the ministry of a deacon, and that's part of the, therefore, I think it's essential that a deacon has been ordained. So that's what I said to the people in the synod. And this bishop who has said before, we have enough priests, so I don't need deacons. He came to see me and he said, maybe I have to think about it. And that was during the first session. In the second session, year after that, he came to me and he said, I've been thinking about it. It's not that stupid an idea to have permanent deacons. I thought, well, what about that? And what he said was, I've been thinking about it, but we can't do it right now. And he explained me the reasons. Would be too long to get into it, but I understood what he was saying, so I respect that, why he couldn't ordain deacons right now. But the fact that you come from someone who says, we don't need them, towards, well, maybe it's not a stupid idea to have them, I think that's a huge step. And I'm convinced that if that bishop can do, well, anybody can do. I'm quite convinced about that. And that is, I think, has to do also with, what was going on through during the Synod on Synodality. Because that's what synodality means. I mean, synodality is, we talked about that before as well, is a very abstract word, but actually it's very concrete, It's not so abstract as we think it is. It just means walking together, walking the path of life together, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. That's what it is. It is actually as simple as that. Of course, putting that into practice is more complicated.
In your vocation, which has just been lovely to hear about, sort of the way that has shifted for you, the unexpectedness, as you keep saying. How did your experience at the Synod of these multiple sessions over multiple years, this building of bridges with all these other folks, how has that shifted your understanding of your vocation as a deacon? How does the walking together maybe not look the same as when you first became a deacon?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's different for a number of reasons. Synodality also starts with the experience. And your experience is always related to who you are. I mean, that's what it is. I think that's very logical. I've been a deacon for 13 years now. So in these 13 years, a lot has been going on, not only in my personal life, but also in the world. I mean, if you look back how the world has evolved the last 13 years, it's the same thing on a personal level. You change as a person. And at the same time, there is a flow in the underground that is the same. I mean, it's a kind of basic trust in the charity, I would say, the love of Christ, because that is what unites us. And that is really, that's really the root of our life. I think that never changes. Of course, it goes up and down, and like all relationships, because basically it's a relationship. The older you get, and the more I got involved in the synodal process, the more I was convinced that we have to get started with these relationships, relationships between people, but also the relationship between the personal relationship between someone and God. Um, you know, I teach moral theology as well, back in Ghent where I live, and at a certain point in in one of the lectures, I say I don't believe, and the students always are surprised when I say that. Say I don't believe, I believe in, and I don't believe in something, but I believe in someone. And that changes everything, actually. That changes the way you look at things. Um, I think that that idea changed as well within the course of the years. Um, or at least the idea, or I would say well, knowing that this was the most important thing. So having these relationships with other people and with Christ, that's vital. It's not only vital for a deacon. Actually, it's vital for every baptized person, because that's why we are baptized. So yes, it has changed over the years. And maybe after 13 years, I could say, well, maybe there is a good chance that I will become some kind of a deacon.
What's some kind of deacon?
Well, you know, there is a high diversity between the deacons. There are about 50,000 deacons in the world, and they're all different. I mean, the context is different, the situation is different. You know, some are married, some are not, some have children, some do not have children. And when I look at this diversity, I think, well, we're blessed with that diversity. I think, you know, the Synod is also about embracing diversity, the exchange of gifts, it's called in the final document. And I think that exchange of gifts between deacons as well could be very huge. We have a lot to offer to each other. And then outside of the deacons, I think that's the case for all the baptized. We have to offer one another quite a lot. Actually, everything. It's that relationship. It's, you know, knowing with your heart that we are brothers and sisters. And that means as well that you will listen in another way to your brother, to your sister. That means as well, if you don't agree with your brother or your sister, it doesn't mean that you will stop loving him or her. So yes, again, these relationships are the key to understand synodality, and also the key to understand Christian life in general.
In this, your experience sort of exchanging of gifts, particularly at the Synod, have you had that similar experience then, like as you've gone home from that? I can't think of like, so I was with some of our students to be present to witness the Synod on Synodality. I'm really grateful to be at the Jubilee for Synodal Teams this last October. And there is this gift of getting to be there in this moment. In the time since, what has that exchange of gifts looked like as you sort of come back to your own community? Like, what has that shifted sort of in the going home part?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I felt extremely blessed by the support I got from my home community. They were really very, very supportive throughout the whole process, supporting me and my family. If they're watching, thank you very much again. Um, But then, of course, comes the real work. I mean, we've been living twice for a month. We've been living in a bubble. How to make sure that you communicate what you have experienced to others. That's the tricky part, I would say. That's the tricky part of any synod, of every synod. And it's one last, you could say it's one last gift by Pope Francis that he decided to have the implementation phase of the synod. So how are we going to implement the final document? Back in Belgium, I'm quite often invited to go and talk about the synod, and it's also in parishes. And the question that comes then is, how could we do that here in our parish? That's a good question, of course, because that will be as well the essential element whether synodality is going to be indeed one of the constitutive elements of our church. I remember Cardinal Hollerich from Luxembourg said that if synodality is not brought into the parishes, we will fail, and we will have failed. So it's very essential to do that. Of course, how are we going to get started with that? And there you can get started with very small steps, I think. I always suggest this. I mean, I asked him, do you pray as a community? And well, not to my surprise, but they always say yes. That's a good thing, right? But then what happens mostly is that they pray during an assembly or during a meeting, put it aside, and then, okay, what are we going to decide upon? Now, what I suggest then is for your prayer, just read the gospel of the day. And then go around the table, let everybody say a phrase or a word that comes up with him that is related to to that reading. And just like that. And afterwards, just put the Bible, put it on the table before you, and maybe a candle along with it, so that you realize that you're not alone there to have your meeting, but that really someone is present, someone with a capital. And a few weeks later, when I first said that to a parish, a few weeks later, I got an email from a parishioner there who was very enthusiastic and said, well, it works. It works. I mean, we talked about some things that were, well, not very light and caused tensions in the past. And now we could talk about it and everybody could say what he had to say, and we came to a decision. So if you manage to have these small steps, I think as a community, you can take a giant leap.
Thank you.